Welcome to this short tutorial on point mounting ants. In this video, we'll go over how to prepare and pin your ants to create a scientific collection. Proper specimen preservation and curation is essential to the scientific process when working with insects. Entomologists working with ants rely on pinned collections to identify their specimens, measure morphological characteristics, track historical changes in diversity, and more. So good point mounting skills are key. Unfortunately, point mounting is notoriously difficult to teach because it all happens under the microscope. I hope you can use this video to get a better idea of the process of point mounting ants. Here's a short list of supplies that you'll need for point mounting. The first method I'll show you is called the ant to pin method. This is how I prefer to mount ants, and it involves gluing the paper point to the ant before attaching it to the metal pin. Let's get started. So here under my scope I have a fire ant, Solenopsis invicta, that I'd like to point mount. I like to work on an index card and lay my ants out on that, partly because it's easier to move around. The first step is to get the ant in the correct position, so I'm going to flip her onto her back and turn her so that her head is facing me. This position is important because it ensures that you're point mounting your ants in the correct direction. I'll explain more about that in a minute. Keep in mind that this positioning is if you're working right-handed, which I am. If you're left-handed, you'll actually want to flip the ant so that her head is facing away from you. Now that she's in position, on her back with her head facing me, I'm going to anchor her with my forceps in my non-dominant hand. I prefer this headlock type hold, where I hold her shoulders with my fine forceps. You'll want to be delicate no matter what hold you decide to use, especially with softer-bodied ants. It's very easy to smush them or accidentally pop their heads off, so don't squeeze too tightly. Once your ant is anchored, you can start to move the legs out of the way with your other pair of forceps, or if your ant is smaller, an insect pin. You want this spot between the second and third coccyx free, especially on the ant's right side, because that's where you're going to put your point. This ant is already in a pretty good position, so now I'll grab a small triangular point with the forceps in my dominant hand and dip it in some glue. I've got a little too much glue on the end of my point, so I'll dab off some of the excess. And now, coming in from the right, I'll just gently place the tip of that point on the space made by the second and third coccyx. Sometimes you have to tap the point down to make sure it's adhered to the ant. Then you can let go and let the glue dry for a few seconds. After the glue has dried, you can pick up the ant by the point and see that she is well positioned. Now all you have to do is stick a pin through the point and she's good to go. You'll notice that when the ant is mounted, we can see her left side. You always want to point mount your ants this way, so that the left side is facing out and the point is going into the ant's right side. This is important because it makes it possible to standardize the imaging of specimens, as you can see with these photos. We always study and take photos of the left side, so we need to keep that side of the ant visible and clear of glue. This is why if you're working left-handed, you need to flip the ant around the other way. Just remember to always point mount your ants from their right side, and you'll be good to go. I know that's a lot to take in, so let's go over the whole process again, and this time I'll show you what's going on outside of the scope too. Once again, I have a fire ant ready to be pinned. First things first, I'll get her into the correct position. Remember, you want to approach with the point in your dominant hand from the ant's right side. Since I'm right-handed, this means I'll turn the ant with her head pointing towards me. If you're left-handed, the ant's head will point away from you. Then I'll anchor her with my non-dominant forceps, and I like to use this headlock hold. Now I'll manipulate her legs to get them out of the way of that space between the second and third coccyx. Once she's in position, I'll keep holding her with my non-dominant hand and use my dominant hand to get the point. But first, I need to get the glue. This is hide glue that's partially diluted with water to keep it from drying out so quickly. See how it drips off the stick? That's a good consistency for the glue. I'll place a drop of glue on another index card, and then I'll use my forceps to grab a point from this petri dish. Next, I'll very gently tap the tip of the point into the glue to get a very small amount. I'll show you what this looks like up close. Here's my small drop of glue on the index card. Now I'm just barely touching the point to the glue, and there you can see a small drop of glue on the tip of the point, a good amount for the ant that we're working with. If you accidentally get too much glue, it's easy to just tap off the excess. So now that we have our point with glue on it, we'll bring it back to our ant that's being held in position under the scope. Coming in from the ant's right side, I'll very gently place the tip of the point between the second and third coccyx and tap it down if needed. Now I'll let the ant go and wait a few seconds for the glue to dry. Once the glue has dried, you can pick up the ant by the point and take it to a piece of foam for pinning. Here I'm using number 2 insect pins, but some people prefer to use number 3. First step is to pick up the ant and flip it over so it's no longer on its back. You want to make sure you pin your ants right side up. Then what I like to do is use the edge of some polystyrene or polyethylene foam and place the point so that the wide part of the triangle is on the foam, but the ant is hanging off the edge. This way, when you push the pin down through the point, you don't put any pressure on the ant, which could pop the ant off the point. Stick the pin through the middle of the wide end of the point, and then use your forceps to adjust the height of the point on the pin. You can also use a pinning block to standardize the placement of your points. A pinning block is just a wooden or metal block with holes set at certain depths. Typically, your pinned insect is going to be the highest thing on your pin, so you'll use the deepest hole for its placement. Subsequent holes can be used to place labels at standardized heights below the insect. To use the pinning block, just stick your pin through the hole slowly and it will push your point to the correct height. And once again, you can see that the ant is sitting on the point facing to the left. The point is placed between the second and third legs and isn't sticking out past the ant. At this point, if your ant isn't in a good position, or if the legs are covering up parts of the thorax, which are useful for identification, you can use an insect pin to gently reposition the ant's legs, antennae, head, and gaster. As you're learning to point mount ants, and even once you're a pro at it, you will inevitably mess up. The great thing about the hide glue that we use is that it's water soluble, which means that you can easily undo a messy point. So with this ant here, I've got her into a good position, she's well anchored in her headlock, and her legs are out of the way. I'm going to come in with a point that has a little too much glue on it. I'll try to tap off the excess and then apply it from the right side. But when I tap down on the point, you can see a huge glob of glue here. That's going to make viewing structures on the ant very difficult once the glue dries. So let's fix it. All you have to do is pick up the ant and soak it in some water. I usually keep a petri dish of water nearby for mess-ups. I usually try to dunk the ant under the water, and after a few seconds of soaking, you can see that the point easily detaches from the ant. Now all you have to do is let the ant dry off, and you can try to point mount her again. Easy fix. As I said earlier, I like to place an index card under my scope to work on. This can make moving the ant around much easier, and you can see here I can get the ant into the correct position by just flipping the index card around instead of having to move the ant. I also like the index card trick because sometimes the ant's legs can be quite stubborn, like you see here. I'm using an insect pin to try to position her legs correctly so that I can get to the second and third coccyx, but they aren't cooperating. So I'll use a pin to hold the legs back and stick the sharp point of the pin into the index card to hold it in place. This is great for when two hands just aren't enough. So now I've shown you my preferred method for point mounting ants, where you place the point on the ant first and then bring it to the pin. But there's another method which many people like. In this alternative method, called pin to ant, the point is already on the pin when you bring it to the ant. I'll show you one example of this method too, in case you find that it works better for you. So for this method, we actually need the ant in a different position. We're still bringing the point to the ant's right side, but since the point is already on the pin, We start with the ant laying on her left side with her head facing away from you. This method should be the same whether you are right or left-handed. We place the point in that same spot between the second and third coccyx, so I'll adjust the legs with my forceps to spread them apart. Now that the ant is in position, you'll grab your pin with the point already on it and dip the tip of the point into the glue just as before. Then you'll want to hold the pin horizontally with the point reaching down towards the ant and touch it to the space between the second and third coccyx. With smaller ants, you can then immediately turn the ant over and make any adjustments. With larger ants, you'll want to hold the point in place for a couple seconds to let the glue dry. There you go! Now you know how to pin ants. Remember that this can be a tough skill to master, so don't get discouraged if you decapitate a few ants in the process. If you notice your hands are really shaky under the microscope, try to anchor your hands on the sides of the microscope or table as you work, and decrease your caffeine intake before long pinning sessions. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Happy pinning!